is Carmen Perez. I'm the Director of Evaluation and Data Insights here at CECP. I've been with the organization for about 4 years. You might know me from doing some custom benchmarking work for your company. I came on board largely focused on CECP's global research expansion. My background before CECP is in the nonprofit sector economic development, and I am just so excited to be in the role today of talking about what we found in our 2014 numbers and sharing that story with you. So if I can have my slides up, that'd be helpful. I took so much inspiration from this morning, hearing from Dr. Cole and Ms. Vivian Picard, and hearing them talk about how it's no longer about making the case to justify your department being there, but it's more so about how to become more strategic and how to make that grow. And I think that that's all what we're going to talk about today as we kind of go through what we saw in 2013. You heard this morning when we were talking about CECP and how we can kind of make sure that your company is plugging in and going deeper on this sea change that we're seeing across the sector. I talked about 4 different ways you can use evaluation and data insights to do that, but we can't do any of that without the results from our survey. This year we went up in quality, we went up in scale, our numbers went up. It was 271 multi-billion-dollar companies that participated in our study. 67 of them Fortune 100. Last year that was 62. Total number last year was 261. So you can see, 10 companies, not that much growth. But when you think about the scale of that growth, it's pretty significant. Daryl mentioned this morning we have $5 trillion in the room in terms of combined revenues. The companies in our study, $8.3 trillion. So if Japan is $5 trillion, we're even a step above that in terms of the companies represented in our study, in our survey. Have to give special thanks and kudos to my colleague Jenny Jung for managing a really record-breaking survey process this year. So it really does take a full team to make this happen. And we're thrilled to have all of you in the room, our community of CECP companies, because this is our first release. We didn't do a press release on this. That's coming out June 2nd, if I'm right, Sarah. So this is just for you. It's the best place to do that because you all have done the work to kind of give us this research and these insights. We also have to do some thanks. As you know, we worked in association with the conference board for the survey for a few years now, so it really is a combined effort to bring all of these companies together. A big thanks to our sponsors, Newman's Own, Travelers, PwC. We've got some other special things this year. The Morgan Stanley team helped us get some pro bono support and some new analysts. Faison is here, so happy to have them on board. Partners this year that also were part of our collaborative process, Business Roundtable, Minnesota Council on Foundations, Silicon Valley Community Foundation, and of course the whole team at CECP, which is not only part of the survey process, but helping us determine what are the most important trends that we can share when we think about what we see in the numbers. So we're using sort of a new framework to think about the trends that we saw from 2014 this year. It's all back to what we talked about making the business case. We think that this is a good framework because it answers 3 questions that we know you're asked often. One is, well, where do we stand? Is that good? That's context. The second is, does it make sense? Does it make sense for our companies to do the type of programs that we're doing? And that's all about core business connection. We're going to talk about that from 4 different perspectives. And then third, it's about results. And the question there is, what's the ROI? What does our company get out of the programs that your departments are running? So that's the framework that we want to use to see what happened in 2014 and looking back over a few years as well. So to make this really real, we're going to start with context. So that question is, does this make sense for our company? I actually want to start with an illustration. So, we talk a lot about how we can provide a customized look at our data for your company. We talk about how you can use our data to either protect or increase your budget. So what would that look like for a company that we have made up called Engage Inc., appropriate name, and they are going into a board meeting. They've got a couple new board members, so they think there's an opportunity to put some new stuff on the table. And the director of citizenship at this company actually wants to put forth a $4.9 million increase, which, knowing that 2014 was actually a pretty strong year for them, they're expecting a little bit of pushback from their board. So how could they take what we found in 2014 to make that case? So this director of citizenship might go into that meeting with a slide like this. Talk about the strength of 2014 in terms of the giving. They sunsetted a program, a signature program, which made their total giving that higher for 2014. And revenue was a little low at Engaging. So they're at 0.12% total giving as a percent of revenue, and $15.25 million in cash. That was their 2014 performance, stronger cash than they'd had in the past. And they know also that when they compare to all companies on both of those measures, they're actually a little bit above, expecting a bit of pushback then on this increase. But when they bring in the context to help make the business case for what they want to roll out, in this case, they're putting forth top quartile numbers. So they might be at 0.12% of total giving as a percent of revenue. Top quartile's at 0.2%. There's a lot of room to grow there, and now they've got the context to show that. They're in the communications industry, 0.18% total giving as a percent of revenue. Even with that large increase that this Director of Citizenship is putting forth, they're not going to hit those high ceilings. And now the board can see that there is space for growth at the company. The same is true looking just at total cash giving. 15 is where they're at, slightly above all companies again, but thinking about top quartile, which is at nearly 40 million in cash, a lot of room to grow. Getting them just under 20 million wouldn't put them there. And they happen to be from Minnesota, a state that we know has a history of deep community engagements, and they certainly want to match up and live up to that legacy of their state. So do you think she made the case? She probably had some good arsenal there to respond to some initial questions that she got, and all of this is real 2014 information, except for engaging, which we made up. So let's go a little deeper then on setting the context, thinking about what it takes to be top quartile. We've got just a little visual there to make sure that we can represent what that is when we say top quartile. It's essentially a rank of all the companies that reported to our study. What does it take to get into that group, that top 25%? And we're showing the minimum. So it's really, that's the threshold to then be top quartile. I already talked about cash giving, total giving as a percent of revenue. Total giving for 2014 was nearly 50 million, and total giving as a percent of pre-tax profit, 1.74. So the number I would suggest sort of locking away in memory would be total giving as a percent of revenue. That's 0.2%. So for a $20 billion company, 0.1% of revenue would be about a $20 million budget. This top quartile figure would bump that up to about 40 million. So top quartile is a really powerful way to set context, because if your company already has a culture of wanting to lead, it gives you that information. Your board might also be asking you, so well, what's happening? Are other companies experiencing large increases? And here we're looking at 2012 up to 2014. What happened across the sector? We've got about 200 companies that gave us information all of these years, so we can look at that. 56% of them increased total giving. So that's any kind of growth above 2% in that total giving number. 56% is a majority. But I think that what's not on this slide, and when we looked at other measures behind the scenes, like total giving increase, top quartile increase, total giving as a percent of revenue, the change that we saw from 12 to 14 in those numbers was actually probably fairly stable, fairly strong, all in that sort of 2% change range. So we didn't necessarily find a lot of growth when we looked across a few different measures of total giving. We think growth is happening, we think innovation is happening, it just might not be in those numbers. And so we turn to all of you with a first poll question to try to dive into what we think, where is that growth happening? What's the story in this time frame of how companies are changing and growing? So the first question I'll pose to all of you is, are your departments doing good that is not counted in total giving? This could be a source of growth, so that could be things like impact investing. It could be things like working together with another department to define a new product or reach a new customer base or improve supply chain. Through your department's efforts, you know that more good is being done, but maybe it's not counted in total giving. And we can attest this year in the survey process, we got more questions than ever of companies sharing really innovative programs that perhaps we had to say would not fit into our definition. And of course, we consider our definitions important in order to keep the benchmarking strong. So let's have everybody punch in their number. We will also ask you to think not just about your company, but what do you see in the field? You're most informed by your company, but do you see that this is one way that companies are also increasing, growing, and innovating? Yes, many examples, 2 maybe, and 3 no. The dance number. So right up towards 50%, yes, there are many examples, and 42% in that category of maybe. I think that's a really strong number to say that nearly half of the companies in this room are seeing that innovation from your departments is happening within giving. So then what's happening with giving? I'll actually turn to my next poll then right away, because we still think that there are changes happening. But the direction that we see is actually also something that Vivian Picard was talking about, which is it's about seeking more within the current budget. So it could be results, it could be focus, it could be new strategy, but it's not necessarily about making the case for new dollars, but about how are you increasing and changing the strategy that you have to bring it back to the company. So yes, many examples, 2 maybe, 3 no. %. That's a strong story right there. That the budget increase, if we're seeing steady and stable giving, the case is strong. It's about going deeper with the funds that you have and the programs that you have to get more out of those dollars and more results. The next step in making the business case is thinking more about core business connection. So this is the question we kind of covered, where do we stand? The question that we're talking about here, can you go back to the PowerPoint, please? Is, does it make sense? So context setting is all about, where do we stand? And now it's about, does it make sense? Core business connection has 4 different points here. International footprint. How are your causes connected back to your core business competencies? The employee factor, which we'll touch just lightly, and more than money, which is the phrase we're using for non-cash giving. So how could you use the core business connection to make the case for different things? We're going to start here with international growth and global growth. There's something about having a proof point behind something which you know is true to help change the hearts and minds. Some people want to see those numbers to know that it's there. And we think that that's the case with international footprint. So as the company's international footprint in terms of revenue grows, we see that giving goes alongside that. So the chart on the right that you're looking at here is international revenue tiers. And then the darker blue bars alongside that shows the average of international giving. It's probably not a surprise that these are trending together with a slight lag. Giving isn't one-to-one to where the international revenue is. But this could be your proof point to say that as we become more global as a company, our giving needs to follow. So I'll take an example. When I think of global companies, Medtronic came right to mind, and I did not plan this. They were my first look. On their website, in their company overview, they've got 45% revenue coming from outside the US, so that put them in the high to mid tier. And their philanthropic overview online has 25% of giving going to recipients outside the US. So they are just a well-packaged example of how this trend is happening in real time. The same is true when it comes to employee footprint, although facing different challenges, but probably related to going global there. But we do see more companies pushing to have their volunteer programs go global, 56% in 2012, all the way up to 62% in 2014. Brief intermission just to talk a little bit about giving around the globe, because CECP is trying to equip and advance the agendas that you have. If you are trying to take these employee programs global, we've got some data, we've got some information from companies outside the US. So what are European companies doing when it comes to matching gifts, when it comes to volunteering? So you might look at this and say, well, we see really strong paid release time program offerings, but less on the pro bono side. We might start with something more oriented towards volunteering, paid release time, versus something like pro bono. Just brief intermission, bringing in another resource that you can leverage throughout the year. So core business connection, another one that I think comes probably even first to mind for people, is thinking about the cause areas that your company is investing in. Education, of course, we heard a lot about that this morning, and how there is the connection back to the business case of seeing how companies are building their career pipeline and making sure they have the employees that are equipped with the skills that they need to be a part of the workforce that you need for the future. As we've reported for a couple of years, education is leading. Education this year was 29% of a typical company's portfolio, so a big slice of that pie. Now 4 percentage points ahead of health and social services, followed closely by community and economic development. You might take something like this, you might want to look at just your industry and then put your company's performance alongside that if you're trying to make the case that you should be pulling towards a cause area which is closer to your business. It gets even more specific than that. So we have info on focus area that all of you have put forth through the survey process. What are we seeing changing there? This is something where you can type in whatever are your top 4 priority areas. We know that STEM education is a priority topic, but let's put a number behind it. In 2014, of the companies that answered this question, nearly 23% are identifying STEM education specifically as a focus area for their company. There's a breakout tomorrow for those of you that are in that space and want to kind of talk about that in more detail tomorrow afternoon. And when we look back to 2009, again, it's not a match set for the data people in the audience, but it is always looking at everyone who responded to the question and seeing how many of those respondents pick these different focus areas. Big growth in all 4 of these categories. When I look to the 3 categories that we've got on the left, I think there's something interesting to think about the state of our country and how cause areas are also responding to societal challenges, connected back to where your business can really make a strong contribution. Veterans. There were veterans in 2009, but we've seen a big spike in terms of the companies that are identifying that as an area where they want to contribute and feel their company is well positioned to do so. We picked response to cancer. It's one example of companies identifying a particular chronic illness or disease where they really want to focus in and try to go deep on one cause area. Employability in workforce, certainly unemployment is a topic that we hear a lot about in the US. So this employability term is something that's new, even though I think workforce development has been there for a long time. So this is, in response, we hear companies asking us a lot, often, like, are other companies in X or X cause? And we do have some information on that. When we did this, I was sure we were going to find something about, digital inclusion or things like that. It wasn't there, but these were some of the big ones that we saw. Deeper dive on a couple topic areas that we see coming up a lot and relevant for this morning's conversation related to higher education. So looking across a few different measures related to corporate contributions to higher education, we see all of them on the rise. Giving is up for companies in the higher education space, partly driven, as we saw already, that education is a bigger piece of the pie. But we would like to go one step deeper and learn a little bit more this year, do a deeper dive, think about what this means, also add in some contextual information. And so we'd like to turn to all of you that are giving in higher ed with another poll question to think about what's the reason for this, what's driving the increase. One option, so first of all, you can split yourself between, yes, you are getting more requests from higher education institutions to those that see them as the same or decreasing over the last few years. And then we've got some reasons that we'd like to put forth. One is more requests related to reduced government funding, which we had an article from the Chronicle on that on the previous slide. The other is because you've put forth that this is your strategic focus area. You've got a business case for more higher ed needs. Higher ed is hearing that and coming to you for it. Yes, we haven't hit the mark, those aren't the reasons. And then no, your requests are actually staying the same or decreasing in the higher ed space. We'll play that jazzy music, give everyone a chance to vote. So a fair number of companies in the room that we see not experiencing an increase. And maybe throughout the year, we'll be reaching out to find those in that number 2 category who have really sort of put forth higher ed as their career pipeline and see how we can go deeper and learn about what that back and forth flow is like and not necessarily seeing your role as intending to fill or reduce gaps that might be coming up because of government spending. So we'll go back to my deck now and look at one more cause area where we see some big changes happening, and that's disaster relief. So the same set of measures, the aggregate of all funding going to disaster relief, average as a % of total, average per company or median per company, all of these measures from 12 to 14 are on the decline when it comes to disaster relief. I've got a study up there that came out from Foundation Center and a few partners thinking about disaster relief. We know that their focus is on thinking about what's the role of long-term rehabilitation when it comes to disaster relief. And also this year, we talked about a short-term, sort of quick convening of companies we did following the Ebola outbreak. The definition of disaster relief is often under pressure, and the policy is under pressure at companies because it's not just weather-related. It might be other things that companies are feeling either drawn to respond to, employees are asking for a response, and just an increasing number of those coming to your company. We'll ask again. We see what we see in the numbers. Let's see if we can drive into some of the reasons for what might have caused this. We heard a lot of questions this year from companies related to changes in the disaster relief policy. So again, the first 3 choices are on the yes side of rethinking your policy. The last choice is that you're not rethinking disaster relief response. On the top end, we have what I mentioned, which is sort of expanding that definition of disaster is becoming more challenging. 2 is the Foundation Center case about a desire to focus on long-term rehabilitation, which might mean you respond to less disasters. And 3rd being that if you've made the business case for particular cause areas, and it must be connected back to our core business, it becomes more difficult to convince board members or senior executives at at your company that they should respond if you can't build that core business connection. So. So not rethinking disaster response, primary response there. For those that are, it looks like the largest is that the core business connection is there, you are making the business case, and thus it becomes more difficult to respond to everything, even though the need may be great. So all this to say that we do know that the response for disaster relief is still very strong. If you go on the corporate response tracker that the Chamber of Commerce does, recently with Nepal, you can see that there's an immense amount of response. So this finding isn't intended to say that companies are pulling back or moving away entirely from disaster relief, but we are trying to sort of dig into some changes that we might see happening in that area. So back to core business connection. This is the employee factor. We only have one finding here on this topic because you're going to hear a deeper dive tomorrow morning just on all the various things we know about employee engagement programs from this year's study. But I wanted to pull out just one on the employee factor. Of course, employees are just a really important stakeholder with how these programs are managed and run. And this is a more tactical, practical point that you might be using when you're making the case for a change related to those employee giving programs that have a match, which is that choice of is the program open or is the program limited? You can see it's a fairly even split, although not exactly. Slightly more companies have a limited match when they do their matching gift programs. But for those that are open, the numbers show that that typically requires a larger budget. So if you're receiving pressure, we want to get more employees excited about employee giving. We need to expand our eligibility of organizations. You've got some data to back you up to say, well, if that's the case, we also need the budget to back that up, or it's going to pull away from other things. Last point on the does it make sense question is thinking about non-cash giving. So we've got our split. The numbers are quite small, but you have all the slides in your packet, so don't worry about taking specific notes here. Looking at the breakdown of a typical company's portfolio between direct cash, foundation cash, non-cash giving. So direct cash, all the cash outside of that foundation budget, and then non-cash inclusive of product, service, pro bono service, and other, which is an expanding category. 17% typical for all companies, and then you can see communications, healthcare, consumer staples, the industries that are sort of rising to the top on the non-cash side. If anyone participated in our Waggle poll beforehand, the top answer of how companies are changing their giving is to think more deeply about that partnership. It's not just about making a grant. And I think that the non-cash piece is a big part of that. So it's not just a strategy about what are we going to do with extra product and where can this go. It's about in those initial conversations with grantees, what might be the non-cash component that would make sense where you can really bring the core business to that nonprofit social mission and also make sure that there's positive benefits and value produced for all. Last question. So we've got where do we stand? We did does it make sense for our company? Third question, what's our ROI? What do we get out of these programs? This is the results section. We saw this morning, talking about the sea change that we're seeing in the field, that there is backing. This is your proof points, talking about as companies increase giving, financial performance is also the strongest. So top tier here is all companies that have increased giving by 10% or more. Median revenue growth rate, median pre-tax profit growth rate in these timeframes is stronger than all other companies. Another proof point from the other side of the coin, we listened to you, we engaged with you over the year on these findings and heard that it would also be interesting to see what do the numbers look like when you control for financial performance. So in this case, we've said, so how did the company perform and then what happened with giving? Top performers, which are the two numbers over on the right, the 8 and the 5%. So top performers are the top 25% in terms of revenue growth or pre-tax profit growth, also most deeply increased their giving investments or their societal investments. So again, 2 proof points. You might want to pick these slides up and drop them into an occasion where they might be appropriate for making the case to senior executives in your company. What I think we think about most when we talk about results measurement is that social side, what's happening, are we getting results information from grantees? We asked information about this for the first time last year, and we were able to do a year-over-year comparison for the first time, and we see growth. So 77% of companies, up to 85% are measuring social impact. We've got our friendly logic model here down on the bottom. We're pointing to any time on at least one grant, are you having grantees report outcomes and impacts? We also see growth in evaluation for those that are going across all of the grants in their portfolio from 19 to 25%. Being an evaluation, of course, I'm psyched to see that this is on the rise, but I think also with one level of caution, which is to just make sure that it's also being done in a resourced way, in a way that's oriented towards goal setting, that's integrating nonprofit feedback, that's right-sized for the relationships, and that the information is being used. So there's both a celebration of seeing increased evaluation and also some excitement to make sure that that's being done in a way that's deeply used by the company. And my last poll, if I can turn to my friend Teresa, to say this might be another part of that growth story, which is that we can't increase what we're doing until we have more proof of results. The results have been in existence, but as this whole presentation is oriented around, some people need those numbers. Our internal decision makers who may be pushing back on your programs, or when you're presenting an increase, giving you requirements that you need to follow up with after, is it about proof of results? So yes, that is what it is. We need more proof of results to make that happen. Maybe they're mixed in their needs, or no. The request for more results data has not been what's been driving or changing that discussion. 54%, yes. I think that it's definitely an important call to action for CECP to make sure that we're helping to deliver what our role can be in making sure that this moves forward, and then also for everyone here to see that as this results conversation moves forward, we really need to collaborate and learn from each other to make that happen in a really good way. So I'll go back just to my last finding for the year. I actually heard some lunch conversation about this a little more when it comes to results. Because as I said, social impact, I think, is the one that comes to mind first. So we're putting 2 findings side by side here. The first is companies in the volunteering section of our study are asked, are you measuring the business value of volunteering? 7 out of 10 are not measuring the business value of volunteering. Separate sections, so I'm being a little bit, I'm putting 2 things together. They're not in the same section, not asked exactly the same way, but the contrast is still very strong. Social outcomes or impacts measured on at least 1 grant. Same set of companies that answered both of these questions. Only 2 out of 10 are not measuring. So this is not intended to be a critique. I see it more as a call to action, an opportunity to think about what is it that we could do, putting similar resources and thought and thinking and energy behind the business results that could also be extremely compelling to make sure that you have the data, the proof, the results to advance the agendas that you have for your programs. So a couple caveats. You've got some pocket slides this year, so a few things that didn't make the cut are there for you. You've got some numbers. You're going to hear more on the employee factor tomorrow from Ginny. Hopefully those 3 questions came through on how you could take some of these, customize them slightly, and use them to your advantage for whatever your agenda is internally. And I'd just like to end with a story of somebody that we engaged in this way. So it was someone I'd worked with. They worked at a bank. They came to us with a customized request. She had put together a 1-pager, a bunch of different information on their programs, had narrowed in, they were a fairly large bank, just to a small set of companies. And that 1-pager was passed to her boss, kind of moved around internally. As with many of them, you don't necessarily know where the numbers go. It was last year at our summit reception that she came up to me and she was like, by the way, that document got in front of our CEO through some channel, saw we were behind our competitive set, and made a multi-million-dollar increase to our budget. So this is an exceptional story. It doesn't always happen that way, but having the numbers and it certainly gave me like, yes, it worked. And having them equipped and there when you need them is certainly what we're here to do. The entire CEC team, data evaluation and data insights, of course. We've got a form here you can use to put in those requests. We always ask for 2 weeks if you can, but happy to take fire drills as well. So it's really been my pleasure to share sort of our perspective on the business case, and hope that you had a few nuggets and takeaways across those 3 questions that we think are commonly answered internally.